Welcome to Ballot Battleground Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Margiott, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. Don't vote for drag Queen Devon. That's the message in bold red letters printed on mailers that started showing up in people's mailboxes ahead of Nevada's primary. It showed a doctored photo of Reno Councilman Devon Reese, who is gay, depicted in drag, and listed a series of attacks, some of them dealing with his personal life. Reese's mother, who lives with him, happened to check the mail that day to find the attack about her son. Reese said he was heartbroken when he saw it.
And so she broke the news to me, and it was, heartbreaking. I was saddened by it. Yeah, the mailer is, it's both blatantly homophobic, it's probably transphobic, but it's also just filled with lies.
Other mailers went after Washoe County School Board President Beth Smith, who was diagnosed with cancer in 2022. Those depicted her as the Grim Reaper in a black robe holding a scythe. The mailer labeled her Beth Death Smith.
To be attacked for being a cancer survivor was really disappointing. Yes, I do have safety plans for when I am both serving and at my home and in other parts of the community.
Clara the Clown, Comrade Hilinski, Bob Lucifer Lucy, the list goes on. Name-calling, personal attacks, they've become the norm in the Northern Nevada political sphere. Wealthy right-wing activist Robert Beadles is behind most of them, sending the mailers from his political action committee, the Franklin Project, and posting the attacks on his blog, Operation Sunlight. We left 2 messages for Beadles asking him if he wanted to be included in these episodes, and he did not respond. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll take a deep dive into the nasty, sometimes personal, sometimes over-the-line political rhetoric that has dominated our politics in Northern Nevada recently. What does it do to the people who are targeted? Why are some taking this tactic? Does it work? Does it discourage good people from getting into public service? And what can be done about it? You'll hear from UNR's Dr. Amy Pason, who studies political campaign rhetoric. Her work lately has focused on ranking some of these campaigns and campaign materials on something called the Dignity Index. You'll hear from Silver State Equality, a group fighting for LGBTQ rights. But first, Beth Smith really opened up to us about the attacks she's faced and the toll they've taken on her and her family. Beth Smith, the president of the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees, thank you so much for coming by our studio today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. I'm really glad to be here.
First time here at News 4, at least in a couple of decades. Welcome.
Thank you.
You were appointed to the school board back in 2021. You won in 2022. Then you had to win again, right, in 2024. So 2 elections now, 1 appointment, and you've been on the school board for about 3 years now. Before we get into the meat of today's conversation, why do you like serving on the school board? What made you want to do it?
I love serving on the Washoe County School Board. I started off as a parent who was really engaged. I saw opportunities for how we could really support public education more, and I realized that a lot was happening to tear it down, but not many people were building it up. And since then, a lot more people have really stepped up to really surround public education, and I'm really glad to be a part of that movement.
So you will be able to do that now for another 4 years. You just a couple weeks ago won re-election outright in this June primary by winning 62%-ish of the vote over a handful of challengers, one of them backed by Robert Beadles, which we will get into. But just because you kept your seat in this election doesn't mean that the attacks that we will talk about today haven't taken a toll on you. So let's start maybe from the beginning, before you kind of got into public office. You follow the news, you pay attention to things. I'm sure that you anticipated and expected taking this step of applying for this seat that you would face some criticism, some attack, there would be some debate. Did you ever expect that it would rise to the level that it has now?
No, I didn't expect it to rise to the level that it is now. When I was a parent and volunteering on the Zoning Advisory Committee, I served on that committee for 4 years. I was the vice chair the first year and then the chair the next 3 years. And back in those days, this was circa 2017 to 21, and zoning was a real hot topic, just the way share is now, but for good reason. Community members didn't feel like they were a part of the process, and so it was very frustrating for them, and that created a lot of anger. But in working in the way that the committee worked, we were really able to bring down a lot of that animosity and build a really strong process. That's what I was looking forward to bringing to the board. And you can do that as long as you're working with neighbors and community members that really want to be a part of the process and want to help make the best decisions. What I wasn't anticipating is that you would have a small group of the community that is just completely wildly out of control with the intensity of their ferociousness, and they can't be reasoned with, often because they believe things that are simply not true. So you can't rationalize with people that are disassociated from reality, and that's definitely posed a challenge.
Back in 2022, September is when you announced that unfortunately you were diagnosed with cancer, specifically Hodgkin lymphoma. Before we get into the attacks that came from that, how are you doing personally? How is your health?
I'm doing really wonderful. I am almost to a year of cancer-free.
Awesome.
And I'm super thrilled for that, truly, honestly.
Did you ever expect in a million years that this diagnosis, this personal health battle that you had would enter into the public sphere in the way that it has? Obviously, you put out a statement saying that you might be scaling back some responsibilities a little bit. You've ramped up since then, obviously. But did you ever expect that that would become part of the attacks against you as a school board member?
No, I admit that I didn't. I have never seen a level of depravity where you're actually attacking cancer survivors and cancer patients. And I believe that that's really a part of the violation of our shared decency in Washoe County. And I think that that's really why this strikes so many people, because I cannot imagine the mindset of a person to put a cancer survivor in death imagery and death messaging. It is against what most Americans would say is okay.
What was your personal and emotional reaction the first time that maybe someone sent it to you, or you got a mailer in the mail, you saw it online, that image of you that we described in the intro to the show, you and this nickname, Beth Smith, looking as the Grim Reaper? I mean, what was your emotional reaction to that?
It was two parts. The first part was just my heart sank. It was so disappointing. I served through cancer. I didn't miss a single meeting through that. This community lifted me up and my family. And while that was a really tough challenge, it was actually a beautiful example of how this community can really come around someone and their family during a time of hardship. To be attacked for being a cancer survivor was really disappointing. The second part of it, though, is not just related to being a cancer patient. It's all of that death imagery and the death messaging. I had a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist reach out and say that all of the messaging around death and killing and murder are actually what they call dog whistle terms that can really incite people to violence. Because when they take on the mantle of being warriors and crusaders, and you put those kind of messages out, it doesn't take very much for someone to say, I'm going to take this into my own hands and I'm going to eliminate this threat, which is how they're positioning me. So on the one hand, it was really heartbreaking to see my cancer diagnosis used in that way, but it was also frightening because all you need is one person to take up action against you to hurt you. And that's exactly what those words are meant to do with the killing, death, and murder. And so that was actually really frightening.
Has that kind of altered your lifestyle of how you kind of interact in the community and how I believe I saw a quote in a recent CBS News story, something to the effect of telling your kids, hey, we need to be extra careful around locking our doors. How have you kind of had to change your lifestyle in response to this?
Well, I've had to talk with my kids about it, and my husband is very supportive as well. The front door might have normally been open because we always have kids coming in and out, but now it stays locked. I've also received messages that people know where my kids go to school, where I live, and so we have to have conversations around staying safe. So unfortunately, my kids are more aware than maybe most about the dangers that are out there related to them. And that's something that shouldn't be a part of public service, particularly not on a local level, not on a national level, but certainly not when you're a mom on the school board.
You're already dealing with enough as it is, trying to battle cancer and serve and have a personal life and a family life, and these attacks start pouring in. How did that take a toll on you? I imagine it had to have.
It's disappointing. I love the work. So many people care about this work as well. And it's a surreal experience, but I know that these attacks are about me, but I actually think it says more about the people doing them. So as hard as it is to not take it personally, I try not to because I recognize that the height of their depravity matches the height of their desperation to control children's education. And I just happen to be standing in their way. So even though these attacks are focused on me, it's not really about me in that sense. It's really about how desperate they are to control local government and to control children's education. And the response from the community is absolutely not. And so that has really been very uplifting because it's actually been very unifying. People from all sorts of different backgrounds, ages, political parties have come together to say, no, not in our community. This is not okay. And that was reflected across many of the election outcomes in the primary.
And that's a good segue into briefly mentioning the election results. And I'll clarify, there were several different candidates, a couple of them backed by Robert Beadles in your race just now, right?
That is correct. You had multiple candidates.
You won by a huge margin. I don't have it in front of me, but probably over 40-some%.
Much higher than that.
Much higher than that. Okay, you know the number.
The second place finisher was around 14%, and I was at around 62%.
And so, there's this rule that we've talked about on the show where if you get over 50% in the primary, you win outright. You don't have to run in November. And so you've already won your seat. We saw across the school board, Robert Beadles backed candidates that lost as well, especially state legislative races, other races. He had a difficult night in terms of the candidates that he endorsed. And so it seems there have been a couple candidates that he's gotten into office in previous cycles, but it seems, as you mentioned, that this community has rejected this approach, rejected these types of tactics and strategies, and yet they continue even to this day.
They do. My hope is that they will be more introspective because the engagement is wanted. The passion is perfectly fine. It's the attacks and the destruction of public education that can't stand. And one of the things that I heard anecdotally, I wish there was a way to find out how many voters in the primary this was their first time voting in a school board race, because I had well over 100 people prior to the election, during, and after tell me that they had never voted in a school board race before, but they did in this cycle. And that was all grassroots. Those are neighbors and community members talking with each other and deciding that they wanted to have their voices heard, because at the end of the day, you get who you elect. And the community really opened up their mind and awareness to this year. And so for having every single candidate be shut out in the school board races, the community was very clear on weighing in and saying that they want professional, productive people on the school board. And school board races are also unique because they can be won in the primary. Many races are not like that. And so thanks to the voters, now those 3 races are complete. Yeah. There are 2 strong candidates in the District G race, no more Robert Beadles candidates. And so now we don't have to see this in the cycle going forward into November.
Anecdotally, for me, you see people on Facebook posting who he's endorsed, and some people will say, don't vote for these people. Supporters of his will say, this is the list of people that you do need to vote for. But this seems like the public local consciousness far more aware of the people that he is backing in some of these races, than we might expect normally. For when I started out covering the Washoe County School Board back in 2016, there was not much public awareness about school board candidates, school board races at all. And so there is one aspect of this where it seems like the community has kind of a heightened sense of awareness, if you will.
And a lot of that's because of the good work that's been done. So I was appointed at a time where Adam Mayberry and Joe Rodriguez also came onto the board through appointment. They later won in their elections. And then we welcomed Alex Woodley and Colleen Westlake. And the majority of the board has been doing really strong work. We've been in the schools, we've been in the communities, and we have manifested a board presence different than previous boards. And that's not to say that theirs was wrong or ours was right. It's just a sign of the times, and it's also a demonstration of what the community expects. So our work and our progression with the school district has garnered a lot of positive attention, and then you also have that coupled with these attacks. Now, if our performance as a board wasn't as strong as it is, then attacks like Mr. Beadles could be more effective, but the community knows our heart, they know our work, and we stand alone and on our own laurels, and that's why attacks like these don't work.
Circling back a little bit to kind of how you've altered or changed your lifestyle, I mean, it's clear from some of the harassing posts and texts that you have felt your safety threatened. In one text that was sent out to tens of thousands of people, it sounds like he invoked a divorce that you had many years ago. Where were you when you received that text message? Because as you said, went out to so many people in our community all at once, and I imagine your reaction had to have just been devastating.
That is a great question. And what people don't know is that I was volunteering at my son's middle school. I was with other parents when that came through and everybody's phones were pinging. And it was shocking and embarrassing, but it also showed me how desperate they were. And every single person I was with and every single person who reached out to me immediately said, this is wrong and we will defend against this. So the community and the people that I were with absolutely didn't fall for any of that. And if anything, it mobilized them even more.
Have you felt your safety was in jeopardy at any point kind of throughout this? Like, did you feel that some of these people that have been motivated by this rhetoric might, it's one thing to say something online, but to carry that out and maybe do something in the real world?
Yes. For matters of importance, I can't comment too much, but yes, I do. I do have safety plans for when I am both serving and at my home and in other parts of the community. Unfortunately, yes.
That's heartbreaking to hear, because you and so many other people on the school board and in public service are just trying to do what you guys feel is right for our community. I mean, it's one thing, of course, to criticize a vote or a policy stance or a position that you've taken, but this clearly has crossed the Rubicon, if you will, crossed the line into something entirely different altogether, where you're worried about your own personal safety, your family's safety.
And especially for my kids and what it is that they see. Very, very much. And the thing is that is really just odd to me is that we're doing really good work and it's not that controversial. Paying our teachers more and evolving education and eliminating fees and expanding athletics, these are positive changes for our community. I genuinely do not understand the basis for these attacks. Washoe County is very moderate. Our board is very productive. I just do not understand this outside of the fact that it's an election cycle. So this is really about securing seats and taking over education. It's about power.
Has all this made you question whether or not you wanted to run again in 2024 or keep serving the district? Because unfortunately, we have seen other people in different roles, Kurt Thigpen comes to mind, that have faced attacks of varying levels, maybe not to this level of severity, but that have stepped down, that have said that it is too much for them. Has it made you question whether or not you want to keep serving?
Yeah, my appointment was after Kurt did step down from his seat in District D. It doesn't. It gives me pause, and it makes me aware that I need to be careful when I'm out in the community, but it does not diminish my love for this role. I love serving on the school board. I love supporting public education. I know that we support the future of our community by uplifting public education, and we're doing really good work. And so if people like that are against us, then it shows me that we're on the right path, because a majority of the community, a strong majority, is cheering us on because they are also a part of this process. So they might be attacking me and they might be attacking our board, but really what they're doing is attacking our community. And that's why the community is not responding well to that. So it might seem strange because a lot of people have asked me, are you sure you want to do this? Will you continue doing this? But the love that I have for this role and the light that I believe that we bring to the community is absolutely worth it to cast out this darkness. And it's an honor to be able to do it.
It too makes me think of the people that are thinking about whether or not they want to serve, to take that step to kind of enter the public sphere, if you will. Have you heard anecdotally from people that might have been thinking about running for a different office and they see what you and others have faced and they just maybe decide that it's not worth it?
Absolutely. So I was already in this role when this started to happen. So I was already in when this was happening. But in talking with candidates who were interested in different races, absolutely. There was a sincere fear about what in their life would be brought up, how they would be attacked, the impact on their children. And a lot of people have chosen to not move forward. And that really has a chilling effect on democracy, which is the third part of what they're trying to do. And that is to keep good neighbors and community members from moving up into service. And I will say that they were effective in that, but we did receive some really strong candidates, one of which, Christine Hall, who won her District A race outright. So there are still people willing to do that, and I hope that we can move forward and really show everyone what our community stands for so that more neighbors do serve. One of the beautiful things about Washoe County and its government is that our elected officials are very accessible. We shop in your grocery stores, we play with our kids at your park, and we need those neighbors to be more involved. And that's a public servant versus a politician. And I think that that's also why so many of our governing bodies are improving, because we are really focusing on public servants and not politicians.
And that's a good reminder for people who are listening to this conversation. Maybe they think that this is your full-time job, when in reality it's not. School board members get paid very little.
The gaming industry was my primary industry, and I was in that industry for over 22 years, and a majority of the time that I served on the board as well. 16 years with IGT and then with other local properties as well. But yeah, school board trustees make $750 a month.
Yeah,
and we are the largest
volunteer position for all intents and purposes.
It shouldn't be that way. That is something that I think we need to look at, because I do think that we would be able to open this up to more representation in the community. But it's $750 a month, and we're the largest government entity in all of Northern Nevada.
That's right. Yeah, bigger than Washoe County, bigger than the city of Reno, 65-some thousand students that you guys are creating policy for this district. And yeah, it's essentially a volunteer position, which potentially locks some people out of the process altogether. Probably conversation for another day. But all that to say, you guys are sacrificing a lot of personal time, taking maybe leaves of absences from your job, or juggling two jobs at once, like Adam Mayberry is doing right now. And so a lot sacrificed to step into this role where you now might face attacks, personal attacks, threats to your own family and safety. Let's end maybe on a little bit of a lighter note, which is you've obviously had more time than most to think about these issues. What do we do to fix it? How do we kind of work our way out of this back to a politics that is the politics of old? Like, not to say this again, but back when I started in 2016, and most of the conversations and the stories that I was doing were focused on the policy and whether or not the district was improving or not improving. How do we get back to that place?
We're doing it now. We are doing it. While none of this has been fun, it's also been remarkable to see the community really rise up, because as a community, we set our own rules for decency and the community also enforces them. So our community members are voting, they're sharing the word with their neighbors and their friends. They are recognizing that the governance they get is what they elect. And so that process is happening right now. I think it is remarkable. It's exactly why Washoe County is being watched on a national level, because we're standing up against this, we're taking control, and the votes actually reflect that. So I am incredibly proud to live here, and I'm incredibly proud to watch this community say no more.
Thank you for your service. Thank you for persevering through your personal health struggles to continue serving on the board. The community appreciates it. Thank you for coming in today and chatting with me. It's been a great conversation. I wish it was about something more substantive, talking about your votes on the school board, but unfortunately we have to have this conversation. I appreciate, though, opening up and kind of letting us in a little bit to something that can be personal and difficult to talk about.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate this opportunity. I don't usually get the chance to really show people what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, because they typically see me in my professional role leading the board. So this has been a nice chance to get to talk, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. We'll have to have you back sometime.
I hope so.
So as we heard, many of Beadles' candidates lost in the primary, and he's been largely unsuccessful at getting people elected in Northern Nevada to this point, with a few exceptions. Despite that, the effect of this rhetoric is no less harmful on the people that are targeted. Unless we focus entirely on Beadles, we do see messaging with similar tactics on the other side at times too. For instance, Nevada Democrats have dubbed Governor Joe Lombardo the Veto Villain. But where does this cross the line? What's fair game in today's politics, and what's verging on dangerous rhetoric? While every person draws their own line of what's acceptable to them and what's not, it's important to have an objective measurement, says our next guest. This week, Dr. Amy Pason and I chat about the history and effectiveness of this type of messaging. In a deep dive chat next week on a fascinating tool called the Dignity Index. What is the Dignity Index, and how does she rank some of the messages we've heard today on that scale? That's coming up in part 2 of our series next week, so stay tuned. For now, here's part 1 of our conversation. And I'm joined now by Dr. Amy Pason, a UNR Associate Professor of Communication Studies, specializing in rhetoric. And it is summer break for you. Finished up a couple classes, probably had some graduations. Did you attend those?
Yeah, and I watched our graduations on Zoom because we do that live stream now, which was nice because I'm still finishing up some of my grading for some of those students as I see them walking across the stage getting their diplomas. I'm putting in their final grades.
I want to be one of your students. We were joking before we started taping. Can I go back to school and take all of your classes? Because I was reading through your bio and I'm like, ooh, I want to take that class and that class and that class.
Yeah, well, you're always welcome to take classes at UNR. You can even take just one-off classes as a graduate special. So
hey,
we're open for business there at UNR.
I'm going to do it. A funny connection that we have is that my wife, Kenzie, took one of your classes. It was almost a decade ago now, and she tells me it was the argumentation and debate class. And so she learned a lot of important skills for debating me, apparently, in your class. So thanks a lot.
Great. I'm glad it was effective.
But the meat of today's conversation is we're going to be talking about political rhetoric, and that's a major focus of your research at UNR. Why is that something that you're interested in? Why is that a topic that you really want to delve into?
Yeah. So at the heart of rhetoric, which a lot of people use that in a negative term, politicians are full of hot air and they just tell us stuff and there's not actually action behind it. But rhetoric is kind of its original base back in ancient Greece was just really the art of persuasion. But part of that art of persuasion has always been connected to democratic culture. Mm-hmm. So how do we govern ourselves by persuading on what the best policy is? So at the heart of why I was interested in getting my PhD in rhetoric was really this idea that democracy is important, how we get along together in society is important, and that preferably, instead of beating each other over the heads with sticks, let's persuade each other on what is the best option going forward and what's going to have the best outcomes for us. So that's really where this gets centered. And obviously in the United States, thinking about political elections, it's all about persuasion and influence and thinking about the different ways that people are trying to convince us that their path is the right way forward.
Before we dive into how the rhetoric has maybe changed in the last several election cycles, especially here in Northern Nevada, take me through a super brief history of, because, nasty political rhetoric, not necessarily something new in American politics. It's been around forever, but maybe it's ramped up in recent years.
Yeah, so nastiness in political rhetoric has been here since the founding. And actually, as our founding fathers were writing things like the Federalist Papers to convince us of this Constitution, they warned against political parties because they saw that that was going to just create factions, that we should really be thinking about stakeholder groups. In one of the Federalist Papers, we should be thinking about the merchants and the farmers, and that those would be really the important perspectives that we should include in politics. But we created parties, and that was sort of just initially. So even when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were running together, John Adams was claiming that newly arrived immigrants were going to vote for Thomas Jefferson, and this was going to be a danger. So even that strain of being fearful of immigrants was all the way at the very beginning. So this is all been a part of our political elections, but what has become normal or acceptable to the public, that's where I think that we've seen some shifts and change. In the 1980s, there was the famous Willie Horton ad that George Bush had put up against Dukakis, basically saying that if we elect Dukakis, we're going to have prisoners escaping and creating mayhem. There was a racial tinge to that ad. And so that was a point that people said, well, that did get attention, but are we a nation where it's normal for us to use racist ads in politics? We don't necessarily like that. George Bush still won the election, so it didn't affect him in that way. But it was a moment for us to say this is a line that we're not willing to cross then in terms of our campaigns. But now that's sort of part and parcel with a lot of ads that we see, is creating a fearfulness of others of a variety of sorts.
I feel like if we saw it today, maybe it would just blend in with some of the ads that we're seeing on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think it would be part and parcel. We could even just look at the recent primary for Senate. Jeff Gunter's ads, I didn't see anything that was just a positive ad about who he was, other than him saying that he was 110% Trump in the kind of monster truck rally version. But he immediately went very negative in the ad that he had that created Sam Brown as a swamp creature, emphasizing even in a cartoonish ways the facial scars. To which some of my students, as I showed that in class, they're like, oh, we thought that was just the cartoon. We didn't realize he was making fun of a service member's battle scars.
Wow.
And so that added a whole other tinge to that direction they went with the ad. But that seems to be normal, and that was his choice of one of the only ads that many of us in Reno saw for that senatorial race.
What has changed? What has kind of caused this to ramp up in recent years, not only in Nevada, but across the country?
Yeah, I think, we see probably with the Trump election and some of the more extreme right wing has made it more normal to use violence, to use more of the fearful rhetoric than we've seen in past elections, right? That's part and parcel of Trump rallies across the nation, repeating the lock them ups in whichever category they want to do, to actually just come out and start running on. There's, rapists and criminals coming from Mexico. And so we just hear that often, which then makes it okay. So I think that having a leader, a president of the United States, use that type of language means that we see it everywhere. And other people that are trying to fit themselves to that image, to that mold, that's where they are utilizing that language because that's what they're hearing on all of the media that they are consuming. So there's definitely a pile of media that is circulating that utilizes that language, and that's why we're seeing it even in a primary ad in the election.
To what extent have we as the American public maybe become a little more desensitized to it over the last several years to the point where something that would have shocked the consciousness 5-6 years ago is kind of normal in 2024?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of factors with it. I think we hear it often, so it's easy to ignore, right? We can even think about mass shootings. We have one that's reported nearly every week, so it's not as shocking as, say, Columbine in 1999 was or Sandy Hook was to us in 2012. But the other factor that not politicians, but political scientists and communication scholars have been looking at is how much that partisan identity plays into what is acceptable to us. So if it's somebody that's from my own political party, I'm more likely to see that as okay. Mm-hmm. They can say something that's extreme, but it's okay because they're the ones that's saying it. And so a recent study put out by the University of Pennsylvania, one of their groups, found that people's partisan identities, how much you strongly hold a good center of your identity in partisan politics, has increased over time. Mm-hmm. So not only is it more normalized because we hear it more often, but we're more likely to ignore it if we have that strong partisan identity.
And that trickles down to, as we will talk about, the local officials that are facing harassment and threats. And I found a study recently done by Princeton University that says harassment and threats to local officials have increased by 55% in the past 2 years. And we've seen that here in Northern Nevada, as we heard from Beth Smith, the president of the Washoe County School Board. You've followed politics here in Northern Nevada and Washoe County, of course. What stands out to you about some of these attacks that we've seen from Robert Beadles and people connected to him? I'll rephrase some of them. Beth Smith, drag Queen Devon, Clara the Clown. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that when we saw the 2016 election, the response from people that were not happy with the Trump election, we had the campaigns of run for something, right? And so encouraging women and minorities and those that weren't involved in politics to run for any office, especially local types of elections, our school boards, our county commissions. If you don't like what you see, get involved. And what we see on the right is that backlash on we don't want everybody to run for something. We want the people that we want that think like us to be in power. So do we see folks like Robert Beadles running for office himself? No, we see him going to board meetings and threatening to spend money to get them out of office. Mm-hmm. Or we see folks not really willing to run to try to convince people that their way is the best, but their goal is to intimidate, to harass, to get people to leave office. So those who got into it because they do want to solve problems, they do want to serve, are the ones being forced to leave because they're worried about their family, their safety. And so what do we see in the rhetoric? It's not convincing us that their policies are better. We should change curriculum because this will help make our students successful.
Sure.
They're using name calling. They're using things that do personal attacks, figuring out things about their personal lives, about divorces, about illnesses, about just a variety of things that, again, if you're calling somebody a clown, are you really serious about what they're doing in that position? So that's where we see that it's no longer trying to persuade on policies or ideas. It really is about coercing and threatening folks to get out of office.
Is that because it works, or separately the kind of shock value factor of calling someone a name and making them out to be a caricature is more likely to get spread on social media and get attention from media outlets, from people in our community, from voters? Is it both?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things involved, right? And I think in part that if we look at Robert Beadles, he's just doing the same kind of language that we see from a Steve Bannon or an Alex Jones, right? So there's folks who have made money and made a name from doing that kind of shocking rhetoric. And we could even go back to all the way to Rush Limbaugh, right? In the 80s, Sure. He's sort of a pioneer of this. So if those are the folks that you want to emulate, if you see those folks as being effective or maybe even aspiring to have the same notoriety of those folks, you're going to use those same tactics. And so I think that's what we see from Robert Beadles' operation is, again, there's not a whole lot in terms of the policy. It's more on we want our folks to take over these spaces, and we'll do it in any way possible.
Such a great conversation with Dr. Amy Pason, but part 2 is even better if I say so myself. So stay tuned for that as we continue this series next week. Before we go, another shameless plug. If you like listening to Ballot Battleground Nevada, do us a huge favor and go vote for us for Best Local Podcast. This show got nominated for the Reno News and Review's Best of Northern Nevada 2024 awards. Go to vote.renonr.com and go to the culture section to find Best Local Podcasts. This final round of voting goes through July 21st. You do have to vote in 10 categories for your vote to be counted. As always, if you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, feel free to shoot us an email to bjmargiott, M-A-R-G-I-O-T-T, at sbgtv.com and put Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.